What's up guys, Excalibur here and welcome back to Star Ocean Anamnesis. So, Freya came out last week and she is pretty fun to play, so I've got a guide for you. Let's get into it. Freya is an ace invoker that excels at fighting from both long range and close range. Her first talent, Light of Purity, imbues all of her attacks with light. This gives her a free elemental imbuement, and it actually works out very well for Freya because her weapon, the Orb, does not have any elemental imbuements, at least not yet, so with this she can contribute to element burst stun. And her second talent, Freya's Prophecy, increases the attack of the entire party by 20% or 35% if they're standing at close range, and increases the int of the entire party by 20% and by 40% if they're standing at long range. Now the attack buff is actually kind of low, and in most parties it just gets overwritten by a different attack buffer. The int buff is actually very good, but as you would guess, Freya is not much of a buffer, she's actually more of a damage dealer, and these two talents work very well with her kit because she uses both int and attack to deal damage, so with this she's basically self-powering. And her third talent, Dispassionate Look, reduces her AP cost by 25% when she's standing at long range, and increases her rush mode damage by 30% when the hit count is at 150 hits or more. Freya's rush is already one of the strongest ones that we have in the game, and with this rush buff, it can actually go up to crazy high numbers, so before you rush with her, make sure that the hit count is sitting at 150 or more. And the AP cost reduction is also very good because her long range attacks don't cost that much AP, so it means that you can actually spam a lot of them in a single combo. And then her last talent, Goddess of Good Crops, increases her attack and int both by 10%. She uses both of these stats to attack, and this talent puts them at a very respectable 3,000 points. For her battle skills, we've got Victory Sword. First of all, generate countless blades around the enemy. Its power is determined by multiplying int by 180%, it does 10 hits, and it costs 19 AP. This attack is really good. It comes out really quickly, has low AP cost, and you can use it from range, so most of the time this is what you use to open your combos. And then we have Crimson Strike. Shoot a beam of fiery judgment. Its power is determined by multiplying int by 280%, it does 5 hits, costs 21 AP, and it has a fire element. And again, this is a very good attack, also has good rush gains, so if you're going to run a ranged setup with Freya, this is the attack that you're going to use as your damage attack, and it also has a fire element to it, which gives Freya even more elemental coverage. And then we have Smackdown. Unleash a series of head-on attacks. Its power is determined by multiplying attack by 250%, it does 5 hits, and it costs 17 AP. And this is one of her close range attacks, and it's also very good. It has low AP costs, and you can use it to set up Heavenly Punishment, because if you charge Assault this, it takes you in close range, and then from there you can use Heavenly Punishment. And speaking of Heavenly Punishment, launch a crazy flurry of attacks. Its power is determined by multiplying attack by 910%, it does 10 hits, and it costs 32 AP. And this is her big finisher attack. You would run this on both long range and close range Freya as a finishing move. It works a little better with close range Freya because you can use Smackdown to charge Assault in close range, and then from there you can use this, which means that you don't have to leave yourself open to getting crit for a couple seconds if you're running long range Freya, but this attack is very good. And then lastly, her rush, Ether Strike. Unleash a powerful ball of energy. Its power is determined by multiplying int by 4,000%, and as a post-rush buff, it reduces her AP cost by 40% and increases her critical hit chance by 30% for 20 seconds. And she has a very powerful rush to top off her amazing set of battle skills. So this rush has a 4,000 multiplier, which means that paired with her 3,000 int stat, it can do a lot of good damage, especially if the hit count is sitting at above 150, which makes this damage go up by 30%, so that this thing can reach some really good numbers. Sucks that it doesn't have an element imbued in it, which means that it's pretty much always going to do light damage, so if you're fighting an enemy that's weak or that resists light, then it'll be kind of unfortunate. So if the hit count is sitting at above 150, I would put this towards the end of the rush chain, if not last. If it's not above 150, still put it towards the end, but pay attention to what other characters you have in the party. And then the post-rush buff is also very good for her comboing. Okay, now on to her equipment. So for a free weapon, I recommend the Vessel of Truth Aetherlight, which has an 832 attack stat and an 834 int stat. It increases damage dealt on Heavenly Punishment and gives you normal attack AP recovery when you're standing in close range, and in Limit Break 5 you unlock 10% damage dealt to humanoids. If you're going to run this weapon, make sure it's max limit broken because you want the max amount of stats that you can get from this thing. The normal attack AP recovery it could come in handy if you get into a party without a 2B, but let's be honest, that's never gonna happen. And the damage on the Heavenly Punishment, that's also good if you're going to run that as your main damage attack. But she actually has some gotcha weapons that she can use too, like the Evil Pumpkin, which increases elemental damage by 20% and increases damage dealt to plants, gives you 10% critical hit chance and 10% critical hit damage. It also gives you HP recovery at Limit Break 3. The crit damage actually synergizes pretty well with her post-rush buff, which increases critical hit chance, of course. And the elemental damage just helps with further increasing her damage output. So the Evil Pumpkin is a good alternative to run, but of course her main weapon is the Ether Laser, which increases light damage by 40% and elemental damage by 20%, gives you 5% extra int, and it also increases int damage by 10% at max limit break. That light damage buff overrides the non-light elemental damage buff, so for Freya it's just a standard 40%. The int buff helps with her ranged attack, so if you're going to run this weapon, then you might want to think about running her ranged setup, and it also increases her rush damage, and if you can manage to get that last factor, that also further increases her damage output. Now for accessories, personally I recommend the Charm of Insight, which increases critical hit chance by 15% and damage by 10%, mostly for that damage buff because she already has that post-rush buff that increases critical hit chance. You could also run any of the healing accessories because she doesn't have a way to heal herself, or you could also run something like Hawkeye Charm. She's actually very flexible when it comes to accessories. And now for her battle skill setup, Freya can actually run two different setups, a long range and a close range attack. Personally, I prefer the close range setup. So first of all, I recommend Victory Sword on both setups because it's a very good combo opener. And then on her close range setup, you would run Smackdown and then Heavenly Punishment. You would charge Assault Smackdown in the middle of your combo to get in close range and use Heavenly Punishment. If you're running the long range setup, you would replace Smackdown with Crimson Strike. And also, if you're running the Ether Laser Orb, it's a smart idea to run the long range setup. So her combo would look like this: a normal attack into Victory Sword, into either Smackdown or Crimson Strike, and then you finish it up with Heavenly Punishment. And there's also a ranged combo you can use, which is Crimson Strike into Victory Sword into as many Crimson Strikes as you can fit, and that's obviously a bit safer than Heavenly Punishment. So for that reason, it's probably smarter to run the long range setup than it is to run Smackdown, but you know, I just like being in close range, which is why I prefer Smackdown. Because Freya buffs both her int and attack stats, you can actually slap her into a bunch of different parties, but if you want one of my stupid recommendations, I recommend Dream Welch. She buffs attack and int damage for the entire party by 10%, 25% if the skill chain is at 3 or more. She increases damage enemies take by 30% when they are below 50% HP, and her damage output is also not too shabby. And secondly, I recommend a Bride Maria, who can buff damage for the entire party by 40%, 50%, 55%, or 60% depending on what the hit count is sitting at. She is also very good at building the hit count. And then lastly, I recommend a Summer Miria, who can buff single target damage for the entire party by 30%. She increases stun chance by 15%, and just like Dream Welch, her damage output is also not too shabby. So like I said, Freya doesn't have a way to heal herself, which is why Dream Welch is here. She can take care of that. She also benefits from Freya's int buff, and then Freya benefits from the attack and int damage buffs, as well as the damage enemies take. Maria builds hit count, which helps with the rush mode buff, and then Summer Miria also builds the hit count. She's also very good at that. Stun chance helps everybody out. Overall, this is a very strong party. It's lacking in attack buffing, which kind of sucks for Summer Miria and Bride Maria, but hopefully the damage output of Dream Welch can compensate for that. So in short, Freya is our very first invoker that can use both physical attacks and int attacks, which means she can attack from both close range and long range, and to top it off, her movement speed is also incredibly high, which means that she is a very safe character to play. She can zip around the battlefield, and it doesn't matter where you're standing, but she'll always be able to attack the enemy. On top of that, she can buff her own attack and int stats, which means you can put her into whatever party you want, which actually makes her very good for public play. But Freya does have a couple downsides, the first one being that she can't heal herself, which does make her a little party reliant, but as long as you know what you're doing, it shouldn't be too bad. However, she's also restricted to the light element. She innately imbues her attacks with light, and orbs don't have any elemental imbuements yet, which means if you're fighting a boss that resists light, you're going to be in a bad spot, and you can't take advantage of elemental weaknesses either. However, she is still a very solid invoker, and probably one of the most fun characters to play in the game, so if you like her, I highly recommend you invest in her. And that's my guide for Freya. So remember when I said I was going to do an Awakened character next? Oh, that's coming in a couple days. I just wanted to do Freya now because she is honestly like one of the most fun characters I've played in this game, if not the most fun I've had playing a character in this game. Regardless, hope that was helpful, and I guess I will see you all next time. Peace!